Well, somebody, me, got a fun new toy in the mail. This is an Italian stiletto-style switchblade made in Italy by a family that's been making them for decades. We'll get to that in a minute. Very excited to get the package. This was a treat to myself because I was hired, luckily, to do some intense research on these weapons, their history. Just finished writing up, that's cute, the sticker, about 12,000 words, which I cranked out in pretty short order. I'm going at double speed in this portion of the video because I'm just getting through all the spam that you receive with it, all the swag. The letter, which I'm going to show in a second, is noteworthy for our purposes in understanding the classic historical Italian switchblades, which really were like the automatic knives to catch, worldwide attention. And the letter talks about how, hey, you've just received a hand-fitted, kind of artisanal switchblade. Let's say semi-artisanal, at least, because, obviously it wasn't 100% handcrafted. And it says each one, like this one, each specimen is inspected before it's sent out, all that good stuff. And like I said, made in Italy by an Italian switchblade making family. This is the business. And it is beautiful, as you'll see. But that letter goes on to warn, classic Italian autos do not focus on blade centering and perfect fit and finish. And that's true, which might surprise some people, but that gets into their history, which we'll touch on. But first, I really, and mostly, just want to play with the knife. And like I said, it was a treat to myself, well-deserved, and I've never owned a made-in-Italy switchblade. So as you can tell, I went with the white scales. I agonized over what color to get, finally went with this. Love it. I think the white and silver color combo combined with the slight highlights of gold, obviously not gold, the metal, meaning the color, looks really, really badass. And that, in fact, is crucial to understanding the history of this object as a weapon. And a very famous one. These things never would have been a thing in terms of martial arts, street combat, etc., if it wasn't for the simple fact that they just look so cool. I mean, look at this one, mine. I can't get enough of it ever since I received it. But do I think this would make a good choice to carry around for self-defense, all legalities and criminal stigma aside? Just based on its physical properties? Absolutely not. And we'll get to a little hands-on experimentation later in the video regarding that. But back to my opinion regarding its suitability as a fighting knife. I'm absolutely not alone in that opinion. There's the safety, by the way. When it's up, then blade cannot be deployed. And if I and others, I would say a majority of, knowledgeable knife people are correct about that, why did this ever become a thing? That's why. The unignorable cool and menace in the look of these, and especially in the opening action. Focus on the stiletto-style blade there, pretty much suitable only for one thing, plunging into an object. And I think we know what kind of object that generally was. This is not a good utilitarian knife. And for corroboration, see the letter that came with it where they warn you, the new owner, hey, this thing isn't necessarily built like a tank. Swivel bolster is pretty neat. That's how you close it. But back to the psychological aspect, which I think is so crucial to understanding its fighting history again. I showed this to my kids. They're both young enough. They have no idea what one is. They've never seen one before, have never seen a movie with one, because it's always, a thug looking intimidating in a movie, or a cool rebel like James Dean. My daughter's reaction, again, with no cultural, historical context whatsoever, quote, "It's scary," end quote. And as you can guess, she has seen no shortage of weapons, including bladed ones, in the house she has been growing up in. Meanwhile, my son, this might be a little classic, stereotypical gender normative, but he liked it more. He thought it was cooler, but I could see the apprehension on his face when I had him open it. And this is a boy who has been allowed to handle and even train somewhat with a fully sharpened katana. Now, these knives from Italy were not the first automatic knives, and it wasn't like they started getting made at a time when all of a sudden nobody else was either. So it's not like the public was discovering them at that time as something new. No, there's just something about the design here that communicates menace, no matter how off the radar that might have been for the original designers. I think one of my big contributions to the study of weapons is how important psychology and even, or maybe including fashion, have been in the history of fighting implements. Oh, this is what the cool kids are carrying? Or the, cool to some criminals? Well, that's what I want to carry then. Little sharpness test coming up. And no, this is not the sharpest knife you're ever going to find. Much like their historical stiletto predecessor and inspiration, again, the blade is pretty much just really good for stabbing. But it's sharp enough that you would not want to get slashed with it. Back to the copycat syndrome, you didn't have to be a budding criminal or gangster to fall for it either. My friends and I in the 1980s walked around with all kinds of weapons that we just thought were cool. Ninja, quote-unquote ninja weapons. Are shuriken or shokin particularly effective or practical self-defense tools, fighting tools? Well, no, of course not. I will now poke myself gingerly on the skin so you can get an idea of the sharpness of the tip. And yeah, it's sharp and pointy enough I would not want to push any harder. Now, back to our old friend, stout, paper-stuffed shipping container. For a reminder, for those of you who are new to the channel, how much resistance does it have? Well, not as much as possible, that's not what I wanted, but it does have some. Here's me smacking it pretty darn hard with a solid steel jute my friend Derek made me, and it's not like it went flying all the way across the room or anything. You could see the resistance. And notice it didn't bend in half, well, not even close. I mean, it didn't even take a significant dent. So what is it like to slash at it with our knife? Just a moderate swing, and even that some people might call abusing the tool, but I wanted to put it through at least some stress. Classic Italian switchblades are not very well suited for fighting, as I mentioned, and one of those aspects is the handle. It's kind of slick and glossy, and shape-wise it was not designed with ergonomics in mind. And there's the scar we left on the surface. As a reminder, that container, the exterior, it's kind of got the consistency of like a soft wood. And I've whacked it repeatedly and hard with various impact weapons, and it still has its shape. Give you some kind of idea of how much it weighs by dropping it a couple times there. Yeah, it's probably pretty stupid to use a knife on it. It's not an ideal target, but probably analogous to hitting, say, a limb mid-fight. Not that I'm recommending anybody use these to fight, but more from a historical weapons perspective, because that's what we do here on the channel. You know, striking a limb mid-fight on a bony portion of the opponent's arm. Now for an easier test. Thrust, which again, like its namesake and historical predecessor, the stiletto, is what this is really designed for. So the whole point of that was, let's make sure this thing held up okay. Seems okay. Now let's talk about knife holds. And given the thin, narrow handle, what would be the best way to hold it for actual use? Natural grip? Fencer's grip? Quarter saber? Those are the three overarching categories to me. Anything else like that, index or thumb support, is just kind of an extra fancy, exotic, and probably not practical variation. You know we nerd out hard on this channel. I know this might be overthinking it, but notice something special about this design. The button exists halfway down the handle, pretty much. So people naturally put their thumb there to open it, like that. That's how most people open it, but that leaves a lot of the handle exposed. So I was thinking, if you want to refine your technique, you should use the middle knuckle, like that on your thumb. You're grasping the handle from end to end instead of just up to the halfway point. In other words, you're much closer to an effective combat grip. It takes less readjusting in the hand. And because of where the button is, I think transitioning smoothly and immediately to the quarter saber grip, as seen there, makes sense. I know there's competing names for the same grip and whatever, and don't really care. Meanwhile, what amounts to the guard on this one, I think would be quite painful with a fencer's grip. If your thumb was right behind the quote-unquote guard, it'd cause you some serious pain. So then, of course, the ice pick grip, which does work well for this kind of narrow, uniform handle. And a blade style. Hear that click? That was the blade trying to open, but getting stuck by my fingers. When that happens, when the knife hits anything on its way out, it just ends up listless like that because the spring's energy has been spent. Let's do a slow motion shot to see how quickly this opens up. And like I said, this is why this knife became popular. There are practical considerations. Of course, it fits in your pocket and it can be opened with just one hand, but none of that was new. And you know, if you have a fixed blade knife, it's much more reliable, and it's also one-hand deployment if you just pull it out of its sheath. How fast was that blade deployment, by the way? Well, I'm going to use the same slow motion setting and drop a USB drive to give you a comparison. And so you can see the blade opening is pretty darn fast. Another quirk about these from a self-defense standpoint is that the button, of course, only resides on one side. So what if you had to open it with your left hand, but you're a righty like me? Well, you can't open it the normal way. You have to have a completely opposite hand position like I just did. Notice the slight wobble here in the blade, and then remember the warning in the manufacturer's letter. And this goes again to the overall suitability of these as combat implements. It's kind of ironic. Despite their lack of suitability, they were used ubiquitously on the streets of many, many countries. Regarding that, here's a quotation from an actual blade manufacturer's website, a manufacturer that specializes in automatic knives. So they sell these. They like them, right? Quote, "Soldiers coming from Europe brought an attractive Italian switchblade called Stiletto. American buyers were dazzled by this Italian invention precisely because it wasn't as practical as the US models. Instead of having a sharp cutting blade, a stiletto was designed as an attack weapon, pointed and menacing." That's why the Italian Stiletto Switchblade is a curious episode in weapons history. Now, as far as this knife in particular that I have, do I think it was worth the money, the $150 I paid before shipping? Absolutely. To get a gorgeous piece like this made in the home of this very memorable weapon type's invention, does that mean I think it is, quote-unquote combat quality? No, I don't. But that is not why I bought it. Well, thanks for watching.